And Simeon's going to pass out our worship bags to our kids. So if you're a kid, make sure we see you, and we'll make sure you get one of those as we sing.
That's a great noise, isn't it? All this little bustling. You know, one of the funny things you learn about in the emergency department is every now and then my nurses tell me something about myself that I don't realize. One of these little idiosyncrasies is like, oh, you always do it just so. He's like, I don't know, it seems reasonable. It's like, oh no, the others never do it that way. And so Roger's normally over there, and that's his spot. And this is my second time preaching here, and I think I'm going to designate this as my spot. And we'll see how it goes. Okay.
I'm like Episcopal or something weird.
There's something. Okay. I think I'm too traditional. I don't know. You need a stand.
The word is central. That's what it is.
That's right. The Bible's central, and I'll be off to the side. So let's pray and ask the Lord to bless our time together and to give us the hearts that we need to have. So, our Heavenly Father, we are blessed. We're blessed, Father, because we get to have your word, and we can have it in numerous copies in our home, and we don't have to hide it, and we don't have to be afraid that someone from the government will find it or our neighbor will see it, but we can just have it, and we can study it. And Father, you give us so many resources to learn about and to learn through, whether it's sermons or commentaries or the internet or something else, Father. And so we want to thank you so much for those many, many resources, and we ask that you would help us to treasure those things, help us to treasure the Word and the Bible. We ask, Father, that we would learn to love it more and more, not because we love the book itself, but because we love you, and it tells us about you, and we love you. So, Father, we do ask that you would bless our time together, that you would work through our time, that you would work through our passage, that you would give us open and moldable hearts, and that we would be all a little bit more like Jesus by the end of our time. So thank you so much. Amen. Is this an okay volume, Nancy?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So Nancy tells me that I tend to mumble and be too quiet, so I need to project. So today our verses are Colossians 1, 15, 16, and 17. I told Roger 17, 18, 19, but that's actually 15 through 17. Let me read those, and we'll dive right in. So, Colossians 1, 15, 16, and 17. So he is the image of the invisible God, and the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So this is actually the first verse of a short hymn in the book of Colossians. That up till now we've gone through verses 1 through 14, and we've been seeing a lot of stuff. We've been seeing how Paul is thankful for the Corinthians, or Colossians. We've been seeing how he's praying for them. He's praying that God will give them wisdom, and that he will, that God will make them fruitful, and that they will learn to love God and treasure God. And now he's launches into this short hymn, and the goal of the hymn is to demonstrate something that maybe the heading in your Bible uses this word. It's called the preeminence of Christ, which is a big word. It's a funny word, but it's a fancy word for saying that it surpasses all others. So Christ surpasses all others. I was trying to think of an example. And if you took a sports analogy, you could say the Patriots are the preeminent team in the NFL, which is wonderful. We would like to say the Celtics were the preeminent team, but if you've been paying attention, they were down by 42 at halftime the last game. So they're not, and the Cavs are. So we honor Jason in saying the Cavs are now the preeminent team. At least the Eastern Conference of the NBA. We don't want to talk about the Western Conference quite yet. So that is what preeminent means. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to demonstrate that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, that's another big word, and the Messiah is a term used in Jewish religion for describing the rescuer, or for talking about the promised deliverer who is going to save both Israel and save the world from sin. And so he's trying to demonstrate that Jesus is the Messiah, and he's doing that by demonstrating that Jesus embodies all of these different Messiah-like characteristics. And what he's doing, when we're reading these passages, we have to remember this letter was written to a particular group of people in a particular set of circumstances. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to encourage them and strengthen their faith, because they have at least 3 outside pressures that are coming on upon them. The first one would be there's a pressure to abandon Jesus and to pursue something they call pantheism. Pantheism would be believing that there are lots and lots and lots of gods. And some people would maybe include Jesus in one of them. Remember that people in Athens were willing to add God to their list or Jesus to their list of other gods. But pantheism would say there's lots of gods, and none of them is particularly special. None of them is particularly powerful. It's a little bit like our Congress. And you kind of get together and you have your alliances, and hopefully whoever the good guys are, they win, and the other guys don't. But there's really not a lot of certainty. They just all happen to be a little bit more powerful than human beings. And every now and then in Greek mythology, you have a human being that starts to get a little bit closer to godlike, and then they get smoshed down. That's what Paul is saying. You need to resist that. Jesus is bigger and better than all of these other gods. The second pressure is he's saying you need to resist the temptation or the pressure to trust in self-made religion and philosophy. And we'll see that in chapter 2 of the book of Colossians. And then later as well, we see that they're not only resisting this pressure from pantheism, resisting a pressure from trying to trust in themselves and what they're just doing what they happen to think is right, but also this pressure from the Jews that are saying, no. If you want to be righteous, you have to obey the Torah, which is another word for the law in the Old Testament. Okay, so there's 3 pressures, and Paul's trying to arm the Colossian church and saying, I want you to know more about Jesus so that you don't get sucked in by these 3 pressures. You have something to stand on, something firm to withstand whatever happens to come your way and whoever happens to deliver that pressure to you during your day. So, in good, keep it simple, stupid terms, we have 3 characteristics about Jesus and then 3 implications. So we'll keep it nice and simple on our sermon today, but let's dive right in. The first characteristic of Christ that we see right at the beginning of verse 15 is he is the image of the invisible God. Now, we wanted to sort of pause very slightly there. Jews took images very seriously, and they had to, because in the 10 Commandments, it was a sin for them to worship a graven image. Remember that? And that makes a lot of sense when you pause and think about it. If you sort of backtrack back, think about Exodus, they had a golden calf. Am I holding this too close, Roger? Or might I just need to speak out less? Okay, what's that?
Just watch.
Okay. They had a golden calf, and so they were worshiping a golden calf while they were getting this law from God. And that wasn't a good idea. And the reason it was such a bad idea is the golden calf, as nice as it was made by a human. And as nice as it was, I'm sure it's very nicely crafted and it looked nice, it's so much less than God. And so having a graven image was an incredibly bad thing in the Jewish religion, because however nice you made it, it was incredibly insulting, because God is so much bigger and better and more wonderful than anything they could possibly create. I was trying to think of an example. If I went on a business trip, and I had 2 options. Option number 1 would be I could take a picture drawn by Ezra of my family. All right, you sort of stick a pen, and he still has that little grasping reflex, and so he's put it in there, and he does something, and I say, that's my family. And that's the best he can do, because he's almost 3 months old, and he doesn't do much at that time, but that's the best he can do. I could take that image with me, and that would be a way to remember my family. Option number 2 would be I could take my family with me. It would be incredibly insulting to my family if I said, you know what, I would rather have the picture than the real thing. I would rather hang out with this little picture that's kind of, it was the best that Ezra could do, because instead of hanging out with you. And I'm going to take the picture, I'll put it in my pocket, and I'm just going to sort of feel satisfied on my inside because I'm somehow doing something with my family, when I'm not really. I'm just hanging out with a picture and a bunch of scribbles on it. And that's what it was like for God, that when the Jews, if they made something, and even if it was the best they could possibly do, it was infinitely inferior to who God is. The Colossians would have been familiar as well with the Greek culture, because if they would have been surrounded by statues of all the Greek gods. And again, as we just mentioned, the Greek gods, they each would have their sort of personal area of expertise, whether it's water, or whether it's sky, or whether it's wind, or sensuality, or whatever else. And that's kind of their area of expertise. And that's what they're sort of good at, or maybe sort of not good at. But if you want, there's none of them's God in the sense that we understand. None of them takes care of everything. Even Zeus, the supposed best of the best, wasn't the best of the best at all. And so this was something Paul is trying to guard them against, thinking that these statues could potentially be what Jesus is like, and he's trying to help them remember that these statues were made by human beings, and they're powerless too. Let's jump over to Colossians 2:9, because as we'll see in here, none of this is true for Jesus. We just read down in Colossians 2:9, for in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. Not just a piece, not just a portion. He was not just sort of kind of Jesus, where there was sort of 50% Jesus or 50% human, or some other variation on the theme. He was all of Jesus, or all of God, wrapped up in a human being. Somehow he was 100% God, and he was 100% human. And again, another example, how do we try and understand how something could be like this? It's again an example, if I were to say that Terry, my wife, for those of you who know, is the exact image of the person who my wife is. It's a bit silly thing to say, right? Because Terry, of course, is my wife. And so in a sense, saying that Jesus is the exact image, the invisible image of God, in a sense, is absolutely true. But in the other sense, it's a little silly too, because he is God. And the reason he is the exact image of God is that's who he is. Just like my wife, Terry, is the exact image of my wife. And so Paul is starting off and he's saying, okay, I want you to remember that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's not a lesser version. He's not some sort of portion. He is all of God, all at once, all at the time. Philip, back in the book of John 14, 9 through 11, Philip was one of the disciples, and he said this to Jesus. He said, Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and that is enough for us. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? That's who Jesus is. Jesus is God. He's the image of the invisible God. He's not just a good teacher. He's not just a guru. He's not just a prophet. He's not just a cool guy. Yesterday we were at a Renaissance fair and I was talking to this individual, and he was sort of had this black leather vest and he had these sort of horns pasted onto his forehead, and he told me, I live in Portland, and I come down and out, I go down to Booth Bay, and I'm a bartender down in Booth Bay. I thought that's fascinating. I'm a pastor at a church in Booth Bay. If you'd love to come, we'd love to hang out with you. And he said, I think all gods are wonderful, and Jesus is cool. I said, Jesus is cool. You're absolutely right. We'd love to have you. But he's more than cool. He's so much more than that. We were in a parking lot, so we didn't talk more about it at the time. But he's so much more than just cool. He's not something that we just tack on. Jesus is God. He's God in every way, in all of the fullness. That's point number one. Point number two. Jesus is the ultimate authority. He is the firstborn of all creation. That's the second part of the verse we see in verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Now, when you first read this, it creates a little question, because when you read it, it sounds like Jesus was created. And there have been a number of people that came up with that idea in the past. There's a guy back in the 3rd century called Arius, who made this very famous line, which is not true. Just so we'll get that. This is not true. This was heresy. He said, there was a time when Jesus was not. All right, so whenever that time was, he was willing to say, okay, Jesus was made before everything else. But he said there was a time, at some point in infinite past, Jesus didn't exist, and then he got made. And that was wrong. That was not a good thing to say. All right, and we know that for a lot of reasons. The first reason we know that, it doesn't make any sense within the context of the rest of the passage. We just read in verse 15, he's the image of the invisible God. And we read over in 2 verses 9, for in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. And then the other idea is this idea of firstborn. When you hear firstborn, I mean, Simeon's my firstborn. The reason he's firstborn is he was the first to be born, which makes a lot of sense. But in that culture, the word firstborn doesn't just mean what we mean with what we would mean with our children. It's a status symbol. And we know that's to be the case within the book of the Bible because over in Psalms 89, verse 20 and 27, you can turn there if you like. But here, God is speaking, or God is writing, in a sense, about David. And in verse 27, he says, about David, I will make him my firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. All right, so if you know a little bit about David, number one, he wasn't the first thing God created. So that would be different. He wasn't even the firstborn in his family. Remember, he was the youngest one in his family. What that's referring to, he's promising you that he's going to elevate David to a position of authority, and that authority will be the same type of authority that a firstborn son would have. It's a status, it's a statement, it's not a term of biological order. And I think that we can very reasonably and safely say that over here in Colossians 1 verses 15, that's what we're talking about as well. It's not that Jesus was the first one to be created, it's that he is preeminent. Remember that? He surpasses them all. And so in that sense, he is the top. He's the firstborn, even though he was not created in the first place. John 1 through 2 kind of clarifies this even more. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was in the beginning with God. So that kind of covers all the bases of there as well. We'll talk about more about this towards the end of the sermon, but we've covered two topics now. Number one, Jesus is God. He's the exact image of God because he is God. We've covered that he has the supreme authority in all of the universe and all of existence. Number three, we see that Jesus is creator. We see that in verse 16. And there are at least three parts to this. That all things are created by him. And then we see that they're all created through him. And then we see that they're all created for him. And so we'll take each one of those. So the idea is through him. If you sort of reckon back to the book of Genesis, in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, where God is saying, and God, and what's documented says, and God said, and then he'd say something like, let there be light. And God said, let there be animals. And God said, let there would be fish. The one we're taught was doing the speaking there, according to Colossians 1, was Jesus. So that when Jesus spoke, light came into existence. Didn't have to do anything else. When Jesus spoke, stars just suddenly flashed into existence. On a quick side note, I was reading this week that there are 10 times more stars in existence than grains of sand in all the beaches and all the deserts added up, put together. Apparently, some poor intern had to calculate this, but there are 70,000 million stars that are visible from Earth. So that doesn't include what's not visible. It's not like we've plumbed the depths of the universe here. There are 70,000 million stars, and apparently there's only 7,000 million grains of sand. So that for every time you go on a beach, which Nancy has been doing today, she was nice enough to come and join us. Every time you go on a beach and you take a step, each one of those grains of sand represents at least 10 stars that God didn't have to work very hard to make. All he had to say was stars, and stars showed up. I can't do that with my house. I can't say clean and my house is clean. I can't even tell my boys to clean and have them clean. And God does that with 70,000 million stars by speaking. And then Jesus can say, let land spring out of the ocean. and it happens. On another side note, if kids, we're going to do a quick vote here. So kids, if you took 70,000 million stars and you made them the size of a water molecule, all right, how much water would you have? And your three options are something the size of the Damariscotta River, something the size of a bathtub, or something the size of a bucket. So who says river? Kids. All right, we got, I think, two there. All right, who says bathtub? And we have two there. And who says bucket? Anybody say bucket? We have two. Oh, we have two more for bucket. It's a tie, and you're all wrong because I didn't give you the right answer. Okay. 10 drops is apparently the right answer. So there are more molecules in a tiny little vial of water than all the stars in existence. And then you start to come adding that up. It's like, wow, God made the ocean, and there's a lot of drops in the ocean. And it's not just water in the ocean either. There's a lot of stuff in the ocean, right? Caitlin's husband could tell us about that probably. All right? And this, how did he do it? He spoke. That's what he did. He said, I would like there to be water. And water, boom, happened. I would like there to be earth. I would like there to be animals that fill it. All right? We're still discovering new animals. God spoke. Jesus spoke, and it happened. Then we see that all things were created through him. Now I was thinking, what's the difference between by and through? And so, for example, if Caleb was making a cake, Caleb's my 6-year-old, for those that don't know, Caleb could very successfully make a cake, and it would be by Caleb. But he could only do it, because he's only 6, if he used my oven, and he used my cooking utensils, and he used my ingredients. So in a sense, if my son made a cake, it would be by Caleb, but it would be through me and my wife, because we bought all the stuff, and we provided him for doing that. In the same sense, Jesus created everything, but he did it through himself. He didn't need anybody else to come along and say, you know what you need? You need some magic pixie dust, and then you'll be able to make some stars. He was completely self-sufficient. He could do it because he could do it. That's who he is. That's his very nature. All he has to do is say stars. All he has to do is say, storm, stop, and it stops. Remember that one? Or he could say, you be healed. Doctors have been trying to heal you for 10 years. Jesus says, I think somebody touched my garment. Remember that story? That's who Jesus is. All things were created by him. All things were created through him. And then we get shocked and we see all things are created for him. Revelation 4:11 puts it this way, worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. And this is a really big topic, and lots of books have been written on this topic, and we should probably do a sermon on it at some point. But that's why the universe was created, and that's why you were created as well. It's not so we could just have a good time. It's not because God was just trying to have a little fun on the side. He created the universe, and he created us that we would glorify him. The purpose is good and right because God is bigger and better than everything else put together. Giving our lives to anything else, as wonderful it might be, is by definition idolatry because it's less than God. And then we see, lastly, in him all things hold together. Jesus didn't just start the universe and leaves it alone. He keeps it all together. The moment Jesus lets the universe go, it stops existing. And all things are held together. We are here because Jesus wants us to be here. Booth Bay exists because Jesus wants Booth Bay to exist. So those are the three things we see about Jesus. Let's talk about three implications. And I can't see our clock because it got moved, but we have a nice clock with big letters on it now, so I think I'm doing okay on time. Implication number 1. This same Jesus is the one we've all rebelled against when we sinned. This same Jesus is the one we're naturally enemies with. He's the one who could justly and rightly send us to hell. And this same Jesus is the one who chose, because he could and he wanted to come to earth, to die, so that we could join him in his inheritance, in his heaven, forever. No, back in Hebrews 12, not only that, but he says that he did it for the joy set before him. He endured the cross. So he didn't just do it just because the Father said, I think this is a good idea. And like my boy said, but with cleaning, he's like, all right. And just sort of mosey over and do the cleaning. It's for the joy set before him. He looked at the situation and he said, I would be delighted to spend eternity with Jason Schlosser. Or Francois. He said, I'm going to do this. And it's not because it's fun, not because it's pleasurable, but for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. And he despised the shame. And he did that because he wanted to. And he did that for you, and he did that for me. And this is the same Jesus that we just saw. He is God. He is the ultimate authority. He created everything by himself. Somebody else didn't do it for him. He did it through himself. He didn't need somebody else's abilities. He had it all right inside him. And he did it for himself. He paid the price so that we could pay, that we could not pay, so that we could spend eternal life with him. This is the Jesus that we get the opportunity to serve. Implication number 2 is we don't need to be afraid. If you are a Christian, Jesus is on your side. We just saw Jesus created everything. And you are part of everything, which means that Jesus created you. He knows your hopes and your dreams. He knows your deepest desires, even the ones you're not aware of yet. He knows how to care for you, and if you're his child, he's promised to do it. He knows how to mold you into the image of Christ, because he knows that's what will bring him the most glory and us the greatest joy. And he knows how to get us to heaven safely, regardless of whatever circumstances we're going through. Whether we're going through happy circumstances, or we're going through much more difficult circumstances, like we're here in Booth Bay instead of Burundi. Right? God is in control of that too. And he knows. On top of all that, Jesus has authority over every visible and invisible throne, dominion, power, and authority. He has authority over Trump, Hillary Clinton, Kim Jong-un, Bashar al-Assad, and Vladimir Putin. Combined, he would have more authority than that, but he certainly has authority over each one, right? He has more authority over the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Supreme Court, the UN, NATO, Russia, Syria, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. Those are just the stuff we can see that fill our news. There's all the stuff we can't see. He has authority over the angels and the demons and the devil. Nothing, whether visible or invisible, can act without his permission. And if you're a Christian, he is on your side. If you're not a Christian, he's offering to be on your side. He's not turning you down. He's offering you a gift. He's saying, if you will accept my son, if you will accept his sacrifice on your behalf, you too can join the family. And then he'll be on your side too. It's an open gift. It's a free gift to everybody. Romans 8:31 through 39 says it infinitely better than I ever could. It's an old favorite thing for many of us. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave us up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? That's a question mark, but it's a rhetorical question. If he gave us his son, we can expect to give him all the things that are good for us and what we need. Who shall separate us from the love of God, Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor things present nor things to come, nor height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. If you're a Christian, you don't need to be afraid. There are lots of things that make us afraid. Even if things are going well, lots of things can make us afraid. If you're a Christian, you don't need to be afraid because we know who's in control. And then lastly, don't settle for anything less than Jesus. And this is what it often comes down to. I know for me, we're presented with choices all day. We can either choose what we want to do. We can choose that which is sinful, that which is promising joy in ourselves or joy in our circumstances, or if I could only have a little bit more stuff, or if I only told a little white lie, or some other thing. Don't settle. Don't settle for anything less than Jesus. We talked about this a lot a few weeks ago, but as I said then, it's one of my favorite verses. So, and when you're preaching, you get to say the favorite verse again. So, Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has, and he buys that field. Jesus is the treasure. Jesus is worth giving up everything for. We can give him our time, energy, money, and family. We can give him our lifestyle, our comforts, our pleasures, our preferences, our orientations, our desires, our hopes, our dreams, wishes, and prayers, and we are not losing out. He is bigger, he is better. He is more precious. C.S. Lewis, great author, put it this way. He said that Christians, this is a summary, he said Christians often get content playing in a mud puddle, making mud pies, when they have been promised a vacation at the seaside. Isn't that astonishing? That I say, God, I've got my mud pie and I've got my puddle and I am happy and I don't want you to take it from me. And when we follow Jesus, he is promising us the equivalent of a vacation at the ocean side. Not that all things are pleasant, not that all things are easy. Following Jesus can be really hard. But we are confident that know that it is for his glory and our good and our joy, and he will get us where we need to be. And ultimately, he'll get us into heaven for eternity. Paul, of course, says it best once again. Philippians 3:6-9. Whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things, and I count them as rubbish, it's trash, in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ. Jesus is worth it. Don't settle for less. We see three things. We see that Jesus is God. We see that Jesus is the ultimate authority. He's the firstborn of all creation. Nobody has more authority than Jesus. You certainly don't, and I know I don't. And we see that by him, all things were created. They were created by him and through him and for him. We can have great joy in our salvation. We can not be afraid. And we can battle back against all those things that we want to do when we know we shouldn't. And say, I'm not going to settle for less than Jesus. He is more precious. He is better. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, you are so precious. And yet, speaking for myself, Heavenly Father, Lord Jesus, I know I don't have a good enough grasp on that. So I ask, Father, for myself and all those that are here and those that are here in this region, in Booth Bay, that you would give us eyes to see how incredible you are. That we would see what a magnificent, glorious gift you offer us in offering to forgive us. That we would not be afraid, but we would trust you, even when it's hard to trust you. And that above all else, Father, we would not settle for anything less than Jesus, whatever that might be. Father, we do ask that you would help us. We ask for your forgiveness for the many times we've sinned. We thank you for your patience. We thank you for this time together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.